Chapter 5, Part 2 of Celebrated Crimes, Volume 3 by Alexandre Dumas, translated by George Burnham Ives. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5, Part 2. Mary Seyton had spoken truly. George Douglas was now another man. Today he seemed to be as respectful and timid as the preceding day he had seemed haughty and proud. He in his turn made a step towards the queen, but seeing Mary Seyton standing behind her— "Madame," said he, "I wish to speak to your Majesty alone. Shall I not obtain this favour?"
"Mary Seyton is not a stranger to me, sir. She is my sister, my friend. She is more than all that. She is my companion in captivity."
"And by all these claims, madame, I have the utmost veneration for her; but what I have to tell you cannot be heard by other ears than yours. Thus, madame, as the opportunity furnished now may perhaps never present itself again, in the name of what is dearest to you, grant me what I ask." There was such a tone of respectful prayer in George's voice that Mary turned to the young girl, and making her a friendly sign with her hand—
"Go then, darling," she said; "but be easy, you will lose nothing by not hearing. Go."
Mary Seyton withdrew. The queen smilingly looked after her till the door was shut; then turning to George— "Now, sir," said she, "we are alone. Speak." But George, instead of replying, advanced to the queen, and kneeling on one knee, drew from his breast a paper which he presented to her. Mary took it with amazement, unfolded it, glancing at Douglas, who remained in the same posture, and read as follows— "We earls, lords, and barons, in consideration that our queen is detained at Lochleven, and that her faithful subjects cannot have access to her person, seeing, on the other hand, that our duty pledges us to provide for her safety, promise and swear to employ all reasonable means which will depend on us to set her at liberty again, on conditions compatible with the honour of her Majesty, the welfare of the kingdom, and even with the safety of those who keep her in prison, provided that they consent to give her up. That if they refuse, we declare that we are prepared to make use of ourselves, our children, our friends, our servants, our vassals, our goods, our persons, and our lives, to restore her to liberty, to procure the safety of the prince, and to cooperate in punishing the late king's murderers. If we are assailed for this intent, whether as a body or in private, we promise to defend ourselves and to aid one another under pain of infamy and perjury. So may God help us. Given with our own hands at Dumbarton, St. Andrews, Argyll, Huntly, Arbroath, Galloway, Ross, Fleming, Herries, Stirling, Kilwinning, Hamilton, and St. Clair, Knight."
"And Seyton," cried Mary. "Among all these signatures, I do not see that of my faithful Seyton."
Douglas, still kneeling, drew from his breast a second paper, and presented it to the queen with the same marks of respect. It contained only these few words— "Trust George Douglas, for your Majesty has no more devoted friend in the entire kingdom. Seyton." Mary lowered her eyes to Douglas with an expression which was hers only. Then, giving him her hand to raise him— "Ah," said she, with a sigh more of joy than of sadness, "now I see that God, in spite of my faults, has not yet abandoned me. But how is it in this castle that you, a Douglas— Oh, it is incredible!" "Madame," replied George, "7 years have passed since I saw you in France for the first time, and for 7 years I have loved you." Mary moved, but Douglas put forth his hand and shook his head with an air of such profound sadness that she understood that she might hear what the young man had to say. He continued— "Reassure yourself, madame. I should never have made this confession if, while explaining my conduct to you, this confession would not have given you greater confidence in me. Yes, for 7 years I have loved you, but as one loves a star that one can never reach, a Madonna to whom one can only pray. For 7 years I have followed you everywhere without you ever having paid attention to me, without my saying a word or making a gesture to attract your notice. I was on the Knight de Mevillon's galley when you crossed to Scotland. I was among the Regent's soldiers when you beat Huntly. I was in the escort which accompanied you when you went to see the sick king at Glasgow. I reached Edinburgh an hour after you had left it for Lochleven, and then it seemed to me that my mission was revealed to me for the first time, and that this love, for which till then I had reproached myself as a crime, was on the contrary a favour from God. I learned that the lords were assembled at Dumbarton. I flew thither. I pledged my name, I pledged my honour, I pledged my life, and I obtained from them, thanks to the facility I had for coming into this fortress, the happiness of bringing you the paper they have just signed. Now, madame, forget all that I have told you, except the assurance of my devotion and respect. Forget that I am near you. I am used to not being seen. Only, if you have need of my life, make a sign, for 7 years of my life has been yours."
"Alas!" replied Mary, "I was complaining this morning of no longer being loved, and I ought to complain, on the contrary, that I am still loved, for the love that I inspire is fatal and mortal. Look back, Douglas, and count the tombs that, young as I am, I have already left on my path: Francis II, Chatelard, Rizzio, Darnley. Oh, to attach oneself to my fortunes, more than love is needed; now heroism and devotion are requisite so much the more, that, as you have said, Douglas, it is love without any possible reward. Do you understand?"
"Oh, madam, madam," answered Douglas, "is it not reward beyond my deserts to see you daily, to cherish the hope that liberty will be restored to you through me, and to have at least, if I do not give it to you, the certainty of dying in your sight?"
"Poor young man!"
murmured Mary, her eyes raised to heaven, as if she were reading there beforehand the fate awaiting her new defender. "Happy Douglas, on the contrary," cried George, seizing the queen's hand and kissing it with perhaps still more respect than love, "happy Douglas, for in obtaining a sign from your Majesty he has already obtained more than he had hoped."
"And upon what have you decided with my friends?"
said the queen, raising Douglas, who till then had remained on his knees before her. "Nothing yet," George replied, "for we scarcely had time to see one another. Your escape, impossible without me, is difficult even with me, and your Majesty has seen that I was obliged publicly to fail in respect, to obtain from my mother the confidence which gives me the good fortune of seeing you today. If this confidence on my mother's or my brother's part ever extends to giving up to me the castle keys, then you are saved. Let your Majesty not be surprised at anything, then, in the presence of others, I shall ever be always a Douglas, that is, an enemy. And except your life be in danger, madame, I shall not utter a word, I shall not make a gesture which might betray the faith that I have sworn you. But on your side, let your Grace know well that, present or absent, whether I am silent or speak, whether I act or remain inert, all will be in appearance only, save my devotion. Only," continued Douglas, approaching the window and showing to the queen a little house on Kinross Hill, "only look every evening in that direction, madame, and so long as you see a light shine there, your friends will be keeping watch for you, and you need not lose hope."
"Thanks, Douglas, thanks," said the queen. "It does one good to meet with a heart like yours from time to time. Oh, thanks!"
"And now, madame," replied the young man, "I must leave your Majesty. To remain longer with you would be to raise suspicions, and a single doubt of me, think of it well, madame, and that light which is your sole beacon is extinguished, and all returns into night." With these words, Douglas bowed more respectfully than he had yet done, and withdrew, leaving Mary full of hope, and still more full of pride, for this time the homage that she had just received was certainly for the woman and not for the queen. As the queen had told him, Mary Seyton was informed of everything, even the love of Douglas, and the two women impatiently awaited the evening to see if the promised star would shine on the horizon. Their hope was not in vain. At the appointed time the beacon was lit. The queen trembled with joy, for it was the confirmation of her hopes, and her companion could not tear her from the window, where she remained with her gaze fastened on the little house in Kinross. At last she yielded to Mary Seyton's prayers, and consented to go to bed. But twice in the night she rose noiselessly to go to the window. The light was always shining, and was not extinguished till dawn, with its sisters the stars. Next day at breakfast, George announced to the queen the return of his brother William Douglas. He arrived the same evening. As to himself, George had to leave Lochleven next morning, to confer with the nobles who had signed the declaration, and who had immediately separated to raise troops in their several counties. The queen could not attempt to good purpose any escape, but at a time when she would be sure of gathering round her an army strong enough to hold the country. As to him, Douglas, one was so used to his silent disappearances and to his unexpected returns, that there was no reason to fear that this departure would inspire any suspicion. All passed as George had said. In the evening the sound of a bugle announced the arrival of William Douglas. He had with him Lord Ruthven, the son of him who had assassinated Rizzio, and who, exiled with Morton after the murder, died in England of the sickness with which he was already attacked the day of the terrible catastrophe in which we have seen him take such a large share. He preceded by one day Lord Lindsay of Byres and Sir Robert Melville, brother of Mary's former ambassador to Elizabeth. All three were charged with a mission from the regent to the queen. On the following day, Everything fell back into the usual routine, and William Douglas resumed his duties as carver. Breakfast passed without Mary's having learned anything of George's departure or Ruthven's arrival. On rising from the table, she went to her window. Scarcely was she there than she heard the sound of a horn echoing on the shores of the lake, and saw a little troop of horsemen halt, while waiting for the boat to come and take those who were going to the castle. The distance was too great for Mary to recognize any of the visitors, but it was clear from the signs of intelligence exchanged between the little troop and the inhabitants of the fortress that the newcomers were her enemies. This was a reason why the queen, in her uneasiness, should not lose sight for a moment of the boat which was going to fetch them. She saw only two men get into it, and immediately it put off again for the castle. As the boat drew nearer, Mary's presentiments changed to real fears, for in one of the men coming towards her she thought she made out Lord Lindsay of Byres, the same who, a week before, had brought her to her prison. It was indeed he himself, as usual in a steel helmet without a visor, which allowed one to see his coarse face, designed to express strong passions, and his long black beard with grey hairs here and there, which covered his chest. His person was protected, as if it were in time of war, with his faithful suit of armour, formerly polished and well gilded, but which, exposed without ceasing to rain and mist, was now eaten up with rust. He had slung on his back, much as one slings a quiver, a broadsword, so heavy that it took 2 hands to manage it, and so long that while the hilt reached the left shoulder, the point reached the right spur. In a word, he was still the same soldier, brave to rashness, but brutal to insolence, recognizing nothing but right and force, and always ready to use force when he believed himself in the right. The queen was so much taken up with the sight of Lord Lindsay of Byres that it was only just as the boat reached the shore that she glanced at his companion and recognized Robert Melville. This was some consolation, for whatever might happen, she knew that she should find in him, if not ostensible, at least secret sympathy. Besides, his dress, by which one could have judged him equally with Lord Lindsay, was a perfect contrast to his companion's. It consisted of a black velvet doublet, with a cap and a feather of the same hue fastened to it with a gold clasp. His only weapon, offensive or defensive, was a little sword, which he seemed to wear rather as a sign of his rank than for attack or defence. As to his features and his manners, they were in harmony with this peaceful appearance. His pale countenance expressed both acuteness and intelligence. His quick eye was mild, and his voice insinuating. His figure, slight and a little bent by habit rather than by years, since he was but 45 at this time, indicated an easy and conciliatory character. However, the presence of this man of peace, who seemed entrusted with watching over the demon of war, could not reassure the queen, and as to get to the landing place in front of the great door of the castle, the boat had just disappeared behind the corner of a tower. She told Mary Seyton to go down that she might try to learn what cause brought Lord Lindsay to Lochleven, well knowing that with the force of character with which she was endowed, she need know this cause but a few minutes beforehand, whatever it might be, to give her countenance that calm and that majesty which she had always found to influence her enemies. Left alone, Mary let her glance stray back to the little house in Kinross, her sole hope. But the distance was too great to distinguish anything. Besides, its shutters remained closed all day, and seemed to open only in the evening, like the clouds, which, having covered the sky for a whole morning, scatter at last to reveal to the lost sailor a solitary star. She had remained no less motionless, her gaze always fixed on the same object, when she was drawn from this mute contemplation by the step of Mary Seyton.
"Well, darling?"
asked the queen, turning round.
"Your Majesty is not mistaken," replied the messenger. "It really was Sir Robert Melville and Lord Lindsay. But there came yesterday with Sir William Douglas a third ambassador, whose name, I am afraid, will be still more odious to your Majesty than either of the two I have just pronounced." "You deceive yourself, Mary," the queen answered. "Neither the name of Melville nor that of Lindsay is odious to me. Melville's, on the contrary, is, in my present circumstances, one of those which I have most pleasure in hearing. As to Lord Lindsay's, it is doubtless not agreeable to me, but it is none the less an honourable name, always borne by men rough and wild, it is true, but incapable of treachery. Tell me, then, what is this name, Mary, for you see I am calm and prepared." "Alas, madam," returned Mary, "calm and prepared as you may be, collect all your strength, not merely to hear this name uttered, but also to receive in a few minutes the man who bears it, for this name is that of Lord Ruthven."
Mary Seyton had spoken truly, and this name had a terrible influence upon the queen, for scarcely had it escaped the young girl's lips than Mary Stuart uttered a cry, and, turning pale, as if she were about to faint, caught hold of the window ledge. Mary Seyton, frightened at the effect produced by this fatal name, immediately sprang to support the queen; but she, stretching one hand towards her, while she laid the other on her heart— "It is nothing," said she; "I shall be better in a moment. Yes, Mary, yes, as you said, it is a fatal name, and mingled with one of my most bloody memories. What such men are coming to ask of me must be dreadful indeed. But no matter, I shall soon be ready to receive my brother's ambassadors, for doubtless they are sent in his name. You, darling, prevent their entering, for I must have some minutes to myself. You know me, it will not take me long." With these words the queen withdrew with a firm step to her bedchamber. Mary Seyton was left alone, admiring that strength of character which made of Mary Stuart, in all other respects so completely womanlike, a man in the hour of danger. She immediately went to the door to close it with the wooden bar that one passed between two iron rings, but the bar had been taken away, so that there was no means of fastening the door from within. In a moment she heard someone coming up the stairs, and guessing from the heavy, echoing step that this must be Lord Lindsay, she looked round her once again to see if she could find something to replace the bar, and finding nothing within reach, she passed her arm through the rings, resolved to let it be broken rather than allow anyone to approach her mistress before it suited her. Indeed, hardly had those who were coming up reached the landing than someone knocked violently, and a harsh voice cried— "Come, come, open the door, open directly." "And by what right," said Mary Seyton, "am I ordered thus insolently to open the Queen of Scotland's door?" "By the right of the ambassador of the regent to enter everywhere in his name. I am Lord Lindsay, and I am come to speak to Lady Mary Stuart." "To be an ambassador," answered Mary Seyton, "is not to be exempted from having oneself announced in visiting a woman, and much more a queen; and if this ambassador is, as he says, Lord Lindsay, he will await his sovereign's leisure, as every Scottish noble would do in his place." "By Saint Andrew," cried Lord Lindsay, "open, or I will break in the door." "Do nothing to it, my lord, I entreat you," said another voice, which Mary recognised as Melville's. "Let us rather wait for Lord Ruthven, who is not yet ready." "Upon my soul," cried Lindsay, shaking the door, "I shall not wait a second." Then, seeing that it resisted— "Why did you not tell me then, you scamp," Lindsay went on, speaking to the steward, "that the bar had been removed?" "It is true," replied he. "Then," returned Lindsay, "with what is this silly wench securing the door?" "With my arm, my lord, which I have passed through the rings, as a Douglas did for King James the First, at a time when Douglases had dark hair instead of red, and were faithful instead of being traitors." "Since you know your history so well," replied Lindsay in a rage, "you should remember that that weak barrier did not hinder Graham, that Catherine Douglas's arm was broken like a willow wand, and that James the First was killed like a dog." "But you, my lord," responded the courageous young girl, "ought also to know the ballad that is still sung in our time. Now on, Robert Graham, the king's destroyer, shame! To Robert Graham clings shame, who destroyed our king." "Mary," cried the queen, who had overheard this altercation from her bedroom, "Mary, I command you to open the door directly. Do you hear?" Mary obeyed, and Lord Lindsay entered, followed by Melville, who walked behind him with slow steps and bent head. Arrived in the middle of the second room, Lord Lindsay stopped, and looking round him— "Well, where is she, then?" he asked. "And has she not already kept us waiting long enough outside, without making us wait again inside? Or does she imagine that, despite these walls and these bars, she is always queen?" "Patience, my lord," murmured Sir Robert. "You see that Lord Ruthven has not yet come, and since we can do nothing without him, let us wait." "Let wait who will," replied Lindsay, inflamed with anger, "but it will not be I, and wherever she may be, I shall go and seek her." With these words he made some steps towards Mary Stuart's bedroom, but at the same moment the queen opened the door, without seeming moved either at the visit or at the insolence of the visitors, and so lovely and so full of majesty that each, even Lindsay himself, was silent at her appearance, and, as if in obedience to a higher power, bowed respectfully before her. "I fear I have kept you waiting, my lord," said the queen, without replying to the ambassador's salutation otherwise than by a slight inclination of the head. "But a woman does not like to receive even enemies without having spent a few minutes over her toilet. It is true that men are less tenacious of ceremony," added she, throwing a significant glance at Lord Lindsay's rusty armour and soiled and pierced doublet.
Good day, Melville," she continued, without paying attention to some words of excuse stammered by Lindsay. "Be welcome in my prison, as you were in my palace, for I believe you as devoted to the one as to the other." Then turning to Lindsay, who was looking interrogatively at the door, impatient as he was for Ruthven to come. "You have there, my lord," said she, pointing to the sword he carried over his shoulder, "a faithful companion, though it is a little heavy. Did you expect in coming here to find enemies against whom to employ it? In the contrary case, it is a strange ornament for a lady's presence. But no matter, my lord. I am too much of a Stuart to fear the sight of a sword, even if it were naked, I warn you."
"It is not out of place here, madame," replied Lindsay, bringing it forward and leaning his elbow on its cross hilt, "for it is an old acquaintance of your family."
"Your ancestors, my lord, were brave and loyal enough for me not to refuse to believe what you tell me. Besides, such a good blade must have rendered them good service."
"Yes, madame, yes. Surely it has done so, but that kind of service that kings do not forgive. He for whom it was made was Archibald Belvacat, and he girded himself with it the day when, to justify his name, he went to seize in the very tent of King James III, your grandfather, his unworthy favourites, Cochrane, Hummel, Leonard, and Torpichen, whom he hanged on Louder Bridge with the halters of his soldiers' horses. It was also with this sword that he slew at one blow in the lists Spence of Kilspindie, who had insulted him in the presence of King James IV, counting on his protection his masters according him, and which did not guard him against it any more than his shield, which it split in two. At his master's death, which took place 2 years after the defeat of Flodden, on whose battlefield he left his 2 sons and 200 warriors of the name of Douglas, it passed into the hands of the Earl of Angus, who drew it from the scabbard when he drove the Hamiltons out of Edinburgh, and that so quickly and completely that the affair was called the sweeping of the streets. Finally, your father James V saw it glisten in the fight of the bridge over the Tweed, when Buccleuch, stirred up by him, wanted to snatch from him the guardianship of the Douglases, and when 80 warriors of the name of Scott remained on the battlefield."
"But," said the queen, "how is it that this weapon, after such exploits, has not remained as a trophy in the Douglas family? No doubt the Earl of Angus required a great occasion to decide him to renounce in your favour this modern Excalibur." History of Scotland by Sir Walter Scott, The Abbot, Historical Part.
"Yes, no doubt, madam, it was upon a great occasion," replied Lindsay, in spite of the imploring signs made by Melville, "and this will have at least the advantage of the others in being sufficiently recent for you to remember. It was 10 days ago, on the battlefield of Carberry Hill, madam, when the infamous Bothwell had the audacity to make a public challenge in which he defied to single combat whomsoever would dare to maintain that he was not innocent of the murder of the king your husband. I made him answer then, I the third, that he was an assassin, and as he refused to fight with the other 2 others under the pretext that they were only barons, I presented myself in my turn, I, who am an earl and a lord. It was on that occasion that the noble Earl of Morton gave me the sword to fight him to the death, so that, if he had been a little more presumptuous, or a little less cowardly, dogs and vultures would be eating at this moment the pieces that, with the help of this good sword, I should have carved for them from that traitor's carcass."
At these words, Mary Seyton and Robert Melville looked at each other in terror, for the events that they recalled were so recent that they were, so to speak, still living in the queen's heart. But the queen, with incredible impassibility and smile of contempt on her lips— "It is easy, my lord," said she, "to vanquish an enemy who does not appear in the lists. However, believe me, if Mary had inherited the Stuart sword as she has inherited their sceptre, your sword, long as it is, would yet have seemed to you too short. But as you have only to relate to us now, my lord, what you intended doing, and not what you have done, think it fit that I bring you back something of more reality, for I do not suppose you have given yourself the trouble to come here purely and simply to add a chapter to the little treatise De Rodomontade Espanola by Monsieur de Brantome."
"You are right, madame," replied Lindsay, reddening with anger, "and you would already know the object of our mission if Lord Ruthven did not so ridiculously keep us waiting. But," added he, "have patience, the matter will not be long now, for here he is." Indeed, at the moment they heard steps mounting the staircase and approaching the room. And at the sound of these steps, the queen, who had borne with such firmness Lindsay's insults, grew so perceptibly paler that Melville, who did not take his eyes off her, put out his hand towards the armchair as if to push it towards her. But the queen made a sign that she had no need of it, and gazed at the door with apparent calm. Lord Ruthven appeared. It was the first time that she had seen the son since Rizzio had been assassinated by the father. Lord Ruthven was both a warrior and a statesman, and at this moment his dress savoured of the two professions. It consisted of a close coat of embroidered buff leather, elegant enough to be worn as a court undress, and on which, if need were, one could buckle a cuirass for battle. Like his father, he was pale; like his father, he was to die young; and even more like his father, his countenance wore that ill-omened melancholy by which fortune-tellers recognise those who are to die a violent death. Lord Ruthven united in himself the polished dignity of a courtier and the inflexible character of a minister. But, quite resolved as he was to obtain from Mary Stuart, even if it were by violence, what he had come to demand in the regent's name, he none the less made her, on entering, a cold but respectful greeting, to which the queen responded with a courtesy. Then the steward drew up to the empty armchair a heavy table on which had been prepared everything necessary for writing, and at a sign from the two lords he went out, leaving the queen and her companion alone with the three ambassadors. Then the queen, seeing that this table and this armchair were put ready for her, sat down, and after a moment, herself breaking this silence more gloomy than any word could have been— "My lords," said she, "you see that I wait. Can it be that this message which you have to communicate to me is so terrible that two soldiers as renowned as Lord Lindsay and Lord Ruthven hesitate at the moment of transmitting it?"
"Madam," answered Ruthven, "I am not of a family, as you know, which ever hesitates to perform a duty, painful as it may be. Besides, we hope that your captivity has prepared you to hear what we have to tell you on the part of the secret council."
"The secret council," said the queen, "instituted by me? By what right does it act without me? No matter, I am waiting for this message. I suppose it is a petition to implore my mercy for the men who have dared to reach to a power that I hold only from God."
"Madam," replied Ruthven, who appeared to have undertaken the painful role of spokesman, while Lindsay, mute and impatient, fidgeted with the hilt of his long sword, "it is distressing to me to have to undeceive you on this point. It is not your mercy that I come to ask; it is, on the contrary, the pardon of the secret council that I come to offer you."
"To me, my lord, to me?" cried Mary. "Subjects offer pardon to their queen! Oh, it is such a new and wonderful thing that my amazement outweighs my indignation, and that I beg you to continue, instead of stopping there, as perhaps I ought to do."
"And I obey you so much the more willingly, madame," went on Ruthven unperturbably, "that this pardon is only granted on certain conditions, stated in these documents, destined to re-establish the tranquillity of the state, so cruelly compromised by the errors that they are going to repair."
"And shall I be permitted, my lord, to read these documents, or must I, allured by my confidence in those who present them to me, sign them with my eyes shut?"
"No, madame," Ruthven returned. "The secret council desire, on the contrary, that you acquaint yourself with them, for you must sign them freely."
"Read me these documents, my lord, for such a reading is, I think, included in the strange duties you have accepted." Lord Ruthven took one of the two papers that he had in his hand, and read with the impassiveness of his usual voice the following: "Summoned from my tenderest youth to the government of the kingdom and to the crown of Scotland, I have carefully attended to the administration, but I have experienced so much fatigue and trouble that I no longer find my mind free enough, nor my strength great enough, to support the burden of affairs of state. Accordingly, and as divine favour has granted us a son whom we desire to see during our lifetime bear the crown which he has acquired by right of birth, we have resolved to abdicate, and we abdicate in his favour, by these presents, freely and voluntary, all our rights to the crown and to the government of Scotland, desiring that he may immediately ascend the throne, as if he were called to it by our natural death, and not as the effect of our own will, and that our present abdication may have a more complete and solemn effect, and that no one should put forward the claim of ignorance. We give full powers to our trusty and faithful cousins, the Lords Lindsay of Byres and William Ruthven, to appear in our name before the nobility, the clergy, and the burgesses of Scotland, of whom they will convoke an assembly at Stirling, and to there renounce publicly and solemnly, on our part, all our claims to the crown and to the government of Scotland. Signed freely and as the testimony of one of our last royal wishes, in our castle of Lochleven, the June 1567.
The date was left blank. There was a moment's silence after this reading. Then,
"Did you hear, madame?"
asked Ruthven. "Yes," replied Mary Stuart. "Yes, I have heard rebellious words that I have not understood, and I thought that my ears, that one has tried to accustom for some time to a strange language, still deceived me, and that I have thought for your honour, my lord William Ruthven, and my lord Lindsay of Byres."
"Madame," answered Lindsay, out of patience at having kept silence so long, "our honour has nothing to do with the opinion of a woman who has so ill known how to watch over her own."
"My lord," said Melville, risking a word. "Let him speak, Robert," returned the queen. "We have in our conscience armour as well tempered as that with which Lord Lindsay is so prudently covered, although to the shame of justice we no longer have a sword. Continue, my lord," the queen went on, turning to Lord Ruthven. "Is this all that my subjects require of me? A date and a signature? Doubtless it is too little. And this second paper, which you have kept in order to proceed by degrees, probably contains some demand more difficult to grant than that of yielding to a child scarcely a year old a crown which belongs to me by birthright, and to abandon my sceptre to take a distaff."
"This other paper," replied Ruthven, without letting himself be intimidated by the tone of bitter irony adopted by the queen, "is the deed by which your grace confirms the decision of the secret council which has named your beloved brother, the Earl of Murray, regent of the kingdom."
"Indeed," said Mary, "the secret council thinks it needs my confirmation to an act of such slight importance, and my beloved brother, to bear it without remorse, needs that it should be I who add a fresh title to those of Earl of Mar and of Murray that I have already bestowed upon him. But one cannot desire anything more respectful and touching than all this, and I should be very wrong to complain. My lords," continued the queen, rising and changing her tone, "return to those who have sent you, and tell them that to such demands Mary Stuart has no answer to give."
"Take care, madame," responded Ruthven, "for I have told you it is only on these conditions that your pardon can be granted you."
"And if I refuse this generous pardon," asked Mary, "what will happen?"
"I cannot pronounce beforehand, madam, but your grace has enough knowledge of the laws, and above all of the history of Scotland and England, to know that murder and adultery are crimes for which more than one queen has been punished with death."
"And upon what proofs could such a charge be founded, my lord? Pardon my persistence, which takes up your precious time, but I am sufficiently interested in the matter to be permitted such a question."
"The proof, madame," returned Ruthven, "there is but one, I know, but that one is unexceptionable. It is the precipitate marriage of the widow of the assassinated with the chief assassin, and the letters which have been handed over to us by James Balfour, which prove that the guilty persons had united their adulterous hearts before it was permitted them to unite their bloody hands."
"My lord," cried the queen, "do you forget a certain repast given in an Edinburgh tavern by this same Bothwell to those same noblemen who treat him today as an adulterer and a murderer? Do you forget that at the end of that meal, and on the same table at which it has been given, a paper was invited to sign that same woman, to whom today you make the haste of her new wedding a crime, to leave off a widow's mourning to reassume a marriage robe? For if you have forgotten it, my lords, which would do no more honour to your sobriety than to your memory, I undertake to show it to you, I who have preserved it, and perhaps if we search well we shall find among the signatures the names of Lindsay of Byres and William Ruthven. Oh, noble Lord Herries!" cried Mary, "loyal James Melville, you alone were right then when you threw yourselves at my feet, entreating me not to conclude this marriage, which, I see it clearly today, was only a trap set for an ignorant woman by perfidious advisers or disloyal lords."
"Madam,"
cried Ruthven, in spite of his cold impassivity, beginning to lose command of himself, while Lindsay was giving still more noisy and less equivocal signs of impatience,
"madame, all these discussions are beside our aim. I beg you to return to it, then, and inform us if, your life and honour guaranteed, you consent to abdicate the crown of Scotland."
"And what safeguard should I have that the promises you here make me will be kept?"
"Our word, madame," proudly replied Ruthven.
Your word, my lord, is a very feeble pledge to offer when one so quickly forgets one's signature. Have you not some trifle to add to it, to make me a little easier than I should be with it alone?"
"Enough, Ruthven, enough!" cried Lindsay. "Do you not see that for an hour this woman answers our proposals only by insults?" "Yes, let us go," said Ruthven, "and thank yourself only, madame, for the day when the thread breaks which holds the sword suspended over your head."
"My lords," cried Melville, "my lords, in heaven's name, a little patience, and forgive something to her who, accustomed to command, is today forced to obey."
"Very well," said Lindsay, turning round. "Stay with her, then, and try to obtain by your smooth words what is refused to our frank and loyal demand. In a quarter of an hour we shall return, and let the answer be ready in a quarter of an hour."
With these words the two noblemen went out, leaving Melville with the queen, and one could count their footsteps, from the noise that Lindsay's great sword made in resounding on each step of the staircase. Scarcely were they alone than Melville threw himself at the queen's feet. "Madame," said he, "you remarked just now that Lord Herries and my brother had given your Majesty advice that you repented not having followed. Well, madame, reflect on that I in my turn give you, for it is more important than the other, for you will regret with still some bitterness not having listened to it. Ah, you do not know what may happen. You are ignorant of what your brother is capable." "It seems to me, however," returned the queen, "that he has just instructed me on that head. What more will he do than he has done already? A public trial? Oh, it is all I ask. Let me only plead my case, and we shall see what judges will dare to condemn me." "But that is what they will take good care not to do, madame, for they would be mad to do it when they keep you here in this isolated castle, in the care of your enemies, having no witness but God, who avenges crime, but who does not prevent it. Recollect, madame, what Machiavelli has said: a king's tomb is never far from his prison. You come of a family in which one dies young, madame, and almost always of a sudden death. Two of your ancestors perished by steel, and one by poison." "Oh, if my death were sudden and easy," cried Mary, "yes, I should accept it as an expiation for my faults. For if I am proud when I compare myself with others, Melville, I am humble when I judge myself. I am unjustly accused of being an accomplice of Darnley's death, but I am justly condemned for having married Bothwell." "Time presses, madame, time presses," cried Melville, looking at the sand which, placed on the table, was marking the time. "They are coming back. They will be here in a minute, and this time you must give them an answer. Listen, madame, and at least profit by your situation as much as you can. You are alone here with one woman, without friends, without protection, without power. An abdication signed at such a juncture will never appear to your people to have been freely given, but will always pass as having been torn from you by force. And if need be, madame, if the day comes when such a solemn declaration is worth something, well, then you will have two witnesses of the violence done you. The one will be Mary Seyton, and the other," he added in a low voice, and looking uneasily about him, "the other will be Robert Melville." Hardly had he finished speaking when the footsteps of the two nobles were again heard on the staircase, returning even before the quarter of an hour had elapsed. A moment afterwards the door opened, and Ruthven appeared, while over his shoulder was seen Lindsay's head. "Madame," said Ruthven, "we have returned. Has your grace decided? We come for your answer." "Yes," said Lindsay, pushing aside Ruthven, who stood in his way, and advancing to the table. "Yes, an answer clear, precise, positive, and without dissimulation." "You are exacting, my lord," said the queen. "You would scarcely have the right to expect that from me if I were in full liberty on the other side of the lake, and surrounded with a faithful escort. But between these walls, behind these bars, in the depths of this fortress, I shall not tell you that I sign voluntarily, lest you should not believe it. But no matter, if you want my signature, well, I am going to give it to you. Melville, pass me the pen." "But I hope," said Lord Ruthven, "that your grace is not counting on using your present position one day in argument to protest against what you are going to do." The queen had already stooped to write. She had already set her hand to the paper when Ruthven spoke to her, but scarcely had he done so than she rose up proudly, and letting fall the pen, "My lord," said she, "what you asked of me just now was but an abdication pure and simple. and I was going to sign it. But if to this abdication is joined this marginal note, then I renounce of my own accord, and as judging myself unworthy the throne of Scotland, I would not do it for the 3 united crowns that I have been robbed of in return."
"Take care, madame!" cried Lord Lindsay, seizing the queen's wrist with his steel gauntlet, and squeezing it with all his angry strength. "Take care, for our patience is at an end, and we could easily end by breaking what would not bend." The queen remained standing, and although a violent flush had passed like a flame over her countenance, she did not utter a word and did not move. Her eyes only were fixed with such a great expression of contempt on those of the rough baron, that he, ashamed of the passion that had carried him away, let go the hand he had seized and took a step back. Then, raising her sleeve and showing the violent marks made on her arm by Lord Lindsay's steel gauntlet, "This is what I expected, my lords," said she, "and nothing prevents me any longer from signing. Yes, I freely abdicate the throne and crown of Scotland, and there is the proof that my will has not been forced." With these words, she took the pen and rapidly signed the 2 documents, held them out to Lord Ruthven, and bowing with great dignity, withdrew slowly into her room, accompanied by Mary Seyton. Ruthven looked after her, and when she had disappeared, "It doesn't matter," he said. "She has signed, and although the means you employed, Lindsay, may be obsolete enough in diplomacy, it is not the less efficacious, it seems." "No joking, Ruthven," said Lindsay, "for she is a noble creature, and if I had dared I should have thrown myself at her feet to ask her forgiveness." "There is still time," replied Ruthven, "and Mary in her present situation will not be severe upon you. Perhaps she has resolved to appeal to the judgment of God to prove her innocence, and in that case a champion such as you might well change the face of things." "Do not joke, Ruthven," Lindsay answered a second time, with more violence than the first. "For if I were as well convinced of her innocence as I am of her crime, I tell you that no one should touch a hair of her head, not even the regent." "The devil! My lord," said Ruthven, "I did not know you were so sensitive to a gentle voice and a tearful eye. You know the story of Achilles' lance, which healed with its rust the wounds it made with its edge. Do likewise, my lord, do likewise." "Enough, Ruthven, enough," replied Lindsay. "You are like a corselet of Milan steel, which is 3 times as bright as the steel armour of Glasgow, but which is at the same time thrice as hard. We know one another, Ruthven, so an end to railleries or threats. Enough, believe me, enough." And after these words, Lord Lindsay went out first, followed by Ruthven and Melville, the first with his head high and affecting an air of insolent indifference, and the second sad, his brow bent, and not even trying to disguise the painful impression which this scene had made on him. History of Scotland, by Sir Walter Scott, The Abbot, Historical Part. End of Chapter 5, Part 2. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia.